Good afternoon, everybody. Pigskin Pete here. Happy Thursday to everybody. Today, I'm going to get into the SEC East Division. The division that I probably know the most about simply because of geography. Obviously, I live in South Carolina.
Far away from Columbia, thank God.
I have a lot of interaction, a lot of friends who are South Carolina fans, and a lot of Georgia fans live in the state of South Carolina as well. So I do pay a lot of attention to all of college football, but outside of the ACC, the SEC East is the one that I've seen more games of over the years and have had the most interest in seeing.
Especially in watching South Carolina lose.
Now, in years past, there were several really good teams in the East. Back when Tennessee was good, Florida had a very great run there for a while. Of course, Georgia's always been one of the top two teams, top two or three, certainly top three teams in the East, for as long as anybody can remember. And of course, there's always South Carolina that's sitting there. But let's be real here. Everybody knows it. Right now, the East is really down. Georgia has emerged as a top team in the country, not just in the East. But Tennessee and Florida are on a terrible run right now. Teams like Kentucky, Vanderbilt, and Missouri have always been sort of the bottom dwellers of that division. However, a couple of those teams have actually gotten a lot better here as some of these other teams regressed.
I use the term better very loosely.
So let's get right into it. We will start with the teams that I think have no shot at winning the division. Vanderbilt. I always like to make comparisons to other teams from other conferences. And when I think of Vanderbilt, I think of Duke in the ACC. Very similar type of situation. These are great academic universities, have a hard time recruiting top-tier talent, especially when they're competing with top-tier teams in the ACC and top-tier teams in the SEC just by geography alone. The coach there reminds me a lot of David Cutcliffe as well. One of the best coaches in the SEC.
Which isn't hard when half of them got fired last year.
Maybe even one of the top 25 coaches in the country, if you ask me. He gets the most out of his players. He's a really good football coach, a much younger version of David Cutcliffe. And I think really it's just a matter of time before Derek Mason gets a job outside of Vanderbilt at a better school. And I think that when he does get that opportunity, he will make the most of it and be a really good football coach.
Maybe he'll even be South Carolina's next head coach.
However, right now, Vanderbilt not going to win it. Missouri. Now, I made a video, I guess maybe a week or two ago, talking about bottom-dwelling teams that could shock people, beat some people they probably shouldn't beat. And I put Missouri on that list out of the SEC. The reason I did that is because of their quarterback, Drew Lock. Not only the best quarterback probably in the East, one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC and anywhere on the East Coast.
And someone tell these idiots there's no Z's in Missouri.
If you're a team like Georgia or even South Carolina who has any aspirations of winning the East and getting back to Atlanta, you're going to have to look out for Missouri. Of course, you have way more talent than they have. Of course, you should win that game 10 times out of 10. But if Drew Lock gets hot in that offense, that Big 12 style offense, they could beat just about anybody if they get hot. You got to be careful.
I'd take Drew Lock over Jake Bentley any day of the week.
Their defense is their biggest problem. And of course, just like Vanderbilt and some of the other bottom dweller teams in the country, they have a hard time recruiting top-tier talent whenever you're sitting right there trying to compete with Tennessee and Georgia and South Carolina and Florida in the same division as far as recruiting goes. So they are at a disadvantage. Don't get caught slipping playing against Missouri. Despite having Drew Lock, sorry, Missouri, not good enough to win the East. Kentucky. Now, if you're a Kentucky fan, you've got to be extremely frustrated.
Mainly because it's not basketball season anymore.
You are not a bottom dweller necessarily, at least the past few years in the East. You're sort of a mid-level team, and you have not been able to take advantage of the fact that Tennessee and Florida are on a downslide. You beat South Carolina 4 years in a row. You played some other teams really close and lost some really close games. You just have not been able to break through that barrier, though, and put yourself in position to compete to win that division. Will this be the year that Kentucky breaks through there and actually tries to give Georgia or South Carolina a run for their money?
Probably not.
And try to capture that East title and shock everybody. Unfortunately, just because your head coach has the last name Stoops does not mean he's going to do anything like what Oklahoma did. And as bad as Louisville is in the ACC, they have owned Kentucky the past few years. So if you can't compete with Louisville, you can't compete with Georgia. Sorry, Kentucky, this is not your year. I know, you don't want to hear that. But look at the bright side. Whenever you line up against South Carolina, Pigskin Pete will be rooting for Big Blue. You're my boy, Blue! Blue, you're my boy! Tennessee. What's been going on at Tennessee for the past 5, 6, 7 years? I don't even know. Tennessee fans can tell me exactly how long this has been going on. It's mind-boggling. I put it right up there with what's been going on with LSU. And what's been going on with LSU pales in comparison to the misery that Tennessee Volunteer fans have been suffering.
You know things are bad when you've been surpassed by the Gamecocks.
Tennessee, a school with great tradition, great football stadium, huge, rabid fan base, loaded with NFL talent. Yet you haven't won a conference game in like 18 or 19 months. That is just inexcusable. I hope you get rid of that stupid trash can.
Maybe replace it with a dumpster that's on fire.
Put that trash can right over Butch Jones' head and then kicked him out the door. Listen, the good news is, when you're at rock bottom at rocky top, which is an oxymoron, I know.
Huh?
There's only one way to go is up. I mean, you can't lose less than 0 SEC games. So you've got, if you win one, you've done something. Now, I tend to believe that Jeremy Pruitt is going to be a better coach than Butch Jones was. Will he end up being an elite coach in that conference who can compete for East titles and eventually SEC titles? Nobody knows. It's just impossible to forecast that. I almost actually do feel sorry for Tennessee fans.
Almost being the key word there.
Tennessee fans also have something in common with Pigskin Pete. They also hate South Carolina. So, and they also wear orange, which is my favorite color, by the way, if you didn't notice.
But it is one ugly type of orange.
What Tennessee needs is a major change in culture. They have a losing culture right now. It's like an infection that gets into a team. When you're on a losing streak like this, they're going to have to change their mentality that they are winners. Can Jeremy Pruitt do that? Who knows? But as for right now, 2018, I see Tennessee, a good season for them would be 5 or 6 wins. If they can do that, then they can build off of that. But you've got to get the ball rolling somehow. 2018 is not Tennessee's year. I'm sorry to all your Tennessee Volunteer fans. It's just not going to happen this year. Florida Gators.
AKA the only team that Steve Spurrier ever really cared about.
As I get into these teams, you notice the dysfunction in some of these teams is astronomical. I mean, listen, Jim McElwain won 2 consecutive SEC East titles, goes out there last year, has a terrible year, and gets fired. Had that whole weird thing where he supposedly lied about getting death threats or something like that, which the whole thing was really weird. I don't know what was going on with that.
I believe him. I think Will Muschamp was the one making those threats.
But if you're consistently winning your division more than you're losing it, and then you get fired, there's something really weird going on there. Was this the Jim McElwain problem, or was this a Florida front office problem? I don't know. Nonetheless, I do think that Dan Mullen was a good hire. I know he had, the worst record in history against beating ranked teams when he was at Mississippi State. But the bottom line is he got Mississippi State in the rankings higher than they've been in a long time. And he did it with much, much less talent than Florida talent. I do think that Florida will be a good team here very soon. When I say good team, am I talking about an 11-win team that competes for SEC titles right off the bat? No, I'm not saying that.
I mean better than South Carolina, again.
But I do think if you're Georgia or South Carolina, you have to look out for Florida. They're not just going to lay down like they did last year for you and allow you to run them over. Florida could be the team, not saying they're going to win the East, they could be the team that upsets the apple cart and knocks some people off. And looking at Georgia's schedule, there's a couple of games they could possibly lose there. If they were to lose those games that they could possibly lose and then somehow lose to Florida, which I don't think is going to happen, but if they did, that could really screw their season up. Florida is one of the most intriguing teams that I'll be keeping an eye on this year. However, I'm not predicting them to win the East this year. The South Carolina Gamecocks. Now, trying to come up with things to say about the Gamecocks that I haven't already said 1,000 times on video is very hard. I went back and forth on how I was going to approach this subject today with this video. People love seeing me trash the Gamecocks, and I love doing it. I'm going to attempt to do my best to be objective right now.
Well, too late. I've already been trashing them for the past 10 minutes now.
Everything I'm reading online, not only from Gamecock fans, but other football fans from around the country, so-called experts, are saying that South Carolina could be good enough to upset Georgia and win the East this year. I'm sorry, guys. Not speaking as a Clemson fan right now, but as a college football fan, I just don't see it. And here's why. It's no secret, I gave Will Muschamp a hard time. Let's look at Will Muschamp's head coaching history. There's a pattern there. So his first year at Florida, 7-6. Not terrible, better than when he took it over, but still pretty bad. His second year at Florida, 11-2. Everyone's singing his praises and saying that Florida is back in the national title hunt.
Starting to sound familiar?
His third year at Florida, 4-8. Wah, wah. Now, let's fast forward to South Carolina. He inherited a 3-win team. His first year there, won 6 games, an improvement. His second year there, last year, 9 wins, big improvement. So just like at Florida, South Carolina fans are expecting 10, 11 wins this next season. And I'm here to tell you, sorry, you're more likely to win less games than you did last year. 2 reasons. First reason, you're not beating Georgia or Clemson. Second reason, Florida and Tennessee are both going to be better than they were last year, and you didn't have flashy wins against them, particularly Tennessee. You should have stomped them into the ground last year, and you let them hang around for 3 quarters. And the last reason is you always lose games you shouldn't lose, not just one every year, but multiple. You could lose to Kentucky for the 5th year in a row. You could lose to Texas A&M at home. Hell, you could possibly even lose to Missouri. Jake Bentley is simply not consistent enough a quarterback to take you where you think you're going.
And FYI, I don't know where you think you're going.
And my question is, after you just gave Will Muschamp a 6-year extension, what are you going to do if you only win 5 or 6 games this year? Are you just going to let it ride and stay with Will Muschamp? Or are you going to pay him out a buttload of money and then go on another coaching hire that will likely end in a 10th choice? I'm sorry, South Carolina fans. This, like every other year in your history, is not your year. Georgia. Listen, all I've been hearing people say is that Clemson's the biggest shoe-in to win the division. Listen, I think that Georgia is as much of a shoe-in to win their division as Clemson is to win theirs.
Go ahead, Georgia fans. Tell me why I'm wrong.
In some ways, maybe even more so. They found their coach. They found their quarterback. They are recruiting at an extremely high level.
And Jake Fromm is fishing at an extremely high level.
People saying, because they lost Sony Michel and Nick Chubb, they're going to take a step backwards. They're not, okay? Trust me. They are like Clemson is at wide receiver. We lose elite wide receiver talent every single year to the NFL, and somehow we don't drop off at the position because we recruit great wide receivers. Well, Georgia's the same way with running backs. They're going to be fine. These young guys who've been sitting on the bench because they were playing behind great talent and Sony Michel and Nick Chubb are going to come and fill that role just fine. And you're going to forget by the end of next year who Nick Chubb and Sony Michel even were. And Georgia has not just 1, but 2 great young quarterbacks. I mean, what Jake Fromm did last year was extremely impressive. Name me one true freshman to come in early in the season like that and do what he did and almost win them a natty.
I hope Trevor Lawrence was taking notes.
Oh, and by the way, if something happens to him, they had the #1 dual threat freshman in the country to back him up. The way I look at it, anything less than a complete choke fest, Georgia is winning the East. And to be honest, if they get back to Atlanta, whether they're playing Alabama or Auburn, I say they have a legitimate shot to beat either one of those teams. I mean, listen, they beat Auburn once last year, and as far as Alabama goes, we're talking about 1 play away from beating them in the national title. There's no reason I think that they can't put together a good game and beat Alabama in Atlanta. So Georgia, if you don't win the East this year, it's going to be a massive, massive disappointment. And do me a favor and don't lose week 2 to South Carolina.
If you do, I will never forgive you. Our friendship will be over.
I'll never hear the end of it. Pigskin Pete checking out.